The rain fell like the heavens were angry. The streets of central Oral City were flooded. The gutters overflowed. Shops stayed shut. Most people stayed indoors. But not Sandra. She held her umbrella like a shield and moved fast through the wet, broken sidewalks. Her uniform was still new, only 2 days old. This job at Apex Towers meant survival for her. She had searched for work for over 6 months. Bills piled up at home, and her little siblings needed food and school fees. Now she had work. She couldn't afford to be late. But just as she turned into City Lane, she saw her. An old woman, barefoot, soaked, standing still like a forgotten statue. Sandra paused. The old woman's gray hair was wet and stuck to her face. Her clothes clung to her thin body. Her hands shivered badly. Everyone else walked past, ignoring her. But Sandra could not. "Mama," Sandra called gently, "you'll get sick like this." No reply. Just a blank stare. Sandra stepped forward, then without a second thought, removed her umbrella and held it over the old woman. "Here, take this," she said, pushing it into the woman's hand. "I'm fine. I can run." Still no words. But slowly, the old woman raised her eyes and stared deep into Sandra's. Then she did something strange. She reached out and touched Sandra's face with her cold, wet fingers. Then she whispered, "You're going to need this kindness. One day it will protect you." Before Sandra could ask what she meant, the old woman turned and walked into the rain barefoot, still holding the umbrella. Sandra stood there, heart pounding, watching her disappear into the fog of the morning rain. She didn't know her name. She didn't know her story. And she didn't know that this woman was the mother of the CEO of Apex Towers. Sandra finally reached the gates of Apex Towers, her uniform half-soaked, her shoes squishing with water. The security man looked at her and shook his head. "You're almost 20 minutes late," he said, scanning her ID card. "You better pray that HR doesn't see you like this." Sandra bowed slightly. "Thank you, sir. I won't be late again." The lobby of Apex Towers looked like another world. Sparkling floors, glass walls, and people in suits walking fast and talking into phones. Sandra walked quickly past them, avoiding eye contact, clutching her cleaning kit. Inside the staff room, the other cleaners had already started preparing their supplies. One of them, a slim woman named Talu, looked at Sandra and laughed. "See this new girl," she said loudly, "already late on her second day. You go soon see how dem go chase you comet." Sandra ignored her and went straight to the locker. Her hands were still cold from the rain. She had given away her only umbrella. Her small fingers trembled as she tied on her apron and put on her gloves. "Cleaner, come here." It was Mrs. Edu, the woman from HR. Her short hair was stiff, and her lips were always tight like she had swallowed sour lemon. Sandra rushed over, trying not to slip. "You're late, and you're dripping water on the floor. Are you here to clean or to bring in rain?" "I'm sorry, Ma," Sandra replied softly. "It won't happen again. I helped someone." "Excuses don't matter in this company," Mrs. Edu snapped. "If you're late again, that's it. You'll be replaced. Do you understand?" "Yes, Ma." Sandra bowed again and quickly returned to her cart. As she wheeled it out of the room, her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she held them in. She needed this job. She had no other choice. Upstairs on the 18th floor, a man in a suit stood in front of a screen. He was the head of internal security. Beside him was the CEO's personal assistant, Mr. Kelvin. They watched silent footage from the building's street-facing security camera. "There," the security man pointed. "This was recorded just 43 minutes ago." On the screen they saw Sandra, her head bowed in the rain, handing her umbrella to an old woman who looked completely lost. Mr. Kelvin leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. "That's her. Madam Grace, the chairman's mother." The security head nodded. We've been trying to track her since she disappeared 2 days ago. This girl found her. Helped her. No hesitation. Mr. Kelvin stared at the screen again. Then he straightened up. Get me her file. The cleaner. What's her name? The security man typed a few keys, and Sandra's face appeared. Sandra Okonkwo. Age 23. No red flags. Hired this week by a private agency. Keep an eye on her, Mr. Kelvin said slowly. Don't approach her yet. The CEO will want to handle this himself. Back on the 10th floor, Sandra was scrubbing the corners of the hallway. She had no idea that someone was already watching her. No idea that the old woman she helped had started something big. And the storm from this small act of kindness? It was just beginning. Sandra worked with quiet determination. Every mop stroke, every spray of disinfectant, every polish of glass. It all mattered to her. Not just because she wanted to do a good job, but because this job was the only thing standing between her and hunger. She moved from hallway to hallway, her mind not just on the dirt she wiped away but on the long journey that brought her here. 3 years ago, she was in her final year at City Central Polytechnic, studying business administration. Her grades were excellent. Her dream was to graduate, get a decent job and pull her family out of poverty. But life doesn't always follow dreams. Her father died in a factory accident. Then, only 7 months later, her mother fell ill and passed away too. Sandra was just 20 then, with 2 younger siblings and a mountain of debt. She dropped out of school and took whatever job she could find. Waiting tables, selling bread, washing clothes, anything legal. She never complained. She just kept going. Now with this job at Apex Towers, she had a small hope again. The pay was small, but it came every week. Enough to feed her brother, a teenager still in school, and her little sister, who had asthma and needed medicine. But even that small hope felt shaky. Lou, the senior cleaner, made things harder for her. Always mocking. Always whispering behind her back. Sandra could hear the gossip. She looks too decent for this job. Maybe she's pretending. Bet you she won't last 1 week. But Sandra never answered them. She worked harder, stayed silent, and kept her mind on her goals. She needed to survive. For her siblings. For her mother's prayers. For herself. At 3 p.m. during her short break, Sandra found a quiet corner of the stairwell and sat on the cold steps with her small water bottle and a piece of dry bread. She chewed slowly, eyes scanning the empty stairwell, thinking about school, about her siblings' school fees, and about the strange old woman from the morning. Her whisper kept echoing in her ears. You're going to need this kindness. One day it will protect you. Sandra shook her head. Maybe she was confused, she muttered to herself. Just an old woman in trouble. But something about the woman's eyes, the way she stared into Sandra like she saw something deeper, it didn't feel ordinary. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairwell opened. Lou appeared. So this is where you hide, eh? She said, arms folded. While the rest of us are working, you're enjoying breeze and bread. I just took 5 minutes, Sandra tried to explain. Save your story, Lou cut in. HR already doesn't like you. Don't say I didn't warn you. As she left, her heels clicking on the stairs, Sandra remained seated. She clenched the piece of bread tighter in her hand. The hunger was still there. But so was her strength. She whispered, I won't lose this job. No matter what. But somewhere above her, on the top floor of the tower, eyes were still watching. And plans were already being made. The girl cleaning floors was about to step into a world she never imagined. It was a quiet Friday morning. The city outside was just waking up. Cars honking, sirens blaring, and people rushing to beat the traffic. Inside Apex Towers, the air smelled of fresh coffee and expensive perfume. But on the 21st floor, the executive floor, it smelled only of polished wood and power. Sandra stood at the elevator door with her cleaning cart. A slip from HR that morning had said, Executive floor maintenance, temporary assignment. She had never been assigned to that floor before. That floor was for directors, shareholders, and the CEO. Cleaners didn't usually go there. It was a place for polished shoes, not worn-out slippers like hers. Her heart pounded as the elevator climbed. Floor 17. Ain't. By the time it reached 21, she felt like she had swallowed her breath. The doors slid open with a soft chime. Unlike other floors, there were no busy staff rushing about. It was quiet. Too quiet. She rolled her cart out, her footsteps echoing against the smooth marble. She started from the corner offices, dusting shelves, wiping tables. She made sure everything shined. She didn't want trouble on this floor. Then she reached it. The corner office with a golden nameplate. Mr. Damalola Ajayi CEO. She stared at the name for a moment. Everyone talked about him like a ghost. He rarely came out of his office. Some staff claimed he fired people with just a look. Others swore he didn't believe in second chances. Sandra took a deep breath and slowly opened the door. It wasn't locked. The room was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the whole city. There was a large desk, 2 black chairs, a sofa, and bookshelves with heavy law and business books. She tiptoed in, her eyes wide. She wasn't supposed to be in here alone. But the slip from HR said entire floor. Sandra placed her cleaning cloth on the table and began dusting carefully, not touching anything important. But something on the wall caught her attention. It was a large picture frame. Inside it was a family portrait, 3 people standing in a garden. A much younger Mr. Damalola in a suit, a gentle-looking man in glasses, and a woman with bright eyes and gray hair tied neatly in a scarf. Sandra stepped closer. Her heart jumped. That woman, the one in the picture. It was the same old woman she had helped in the rain. Sandra's hands trembled. She looked again, blinking fast. It was her. No doubt. Same eyes. Same wrinkles. Same shape of the nose. What was she doing in the CEO's office photo? Suddenly she heard the click of the door. She froze. The CEO stood there. Mr. Damalola Ajayi. Tall. Dark-skinned. Wearing a dark suit. No smile. Just cold, sharp eyes that scanned her from head to toe. What are you doing in my office? His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority. Sandra's tongue tied. Sorry, sir. I was just cleaning, HR said. Did they tell you to inspect my family photos too? He asked, stepping in. Sandra quickly bowed. No, sir. I just... Out, he said, pointing to the door. Sandra grabbed her cloth and rushed out, her face burning with shame. As the door closed behind her, Mr. Damalola walked to the photo and stared at it for a long moment. He picked up his phone and made a call. Kelvin, I want to know everything about the new cleaner. Start digging. Inside the elevator, Sandra leaned back against the wall, her heart racing. Why was that woman in the CEO's photo? And why was she looking so closely at me that morning? She didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped into a secret web. And someone had already started pulling the strings. At exactly 10:05 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up in front of Apex Towers. The driver, dressed in a smart navy uniform, stepped out quickly and opened the rear door. From inside, a woman slowly emerged. It was Madame Grace. Her gray scarf was back in place, her clothes clean and neat, and her posture proud once again. But her eyes still carried a deep tiredness, like someone who had walked through fire and was just beginning to breathe again. She stood by the car for a moment, looking up at the tall glass building. The wind tugged gently at her scarf. Her fingers gripped the walking stick she now used, though she barely leaned on it. The receptionist inside had no idea who she was. "Mama, are you sure you're in the right building?" the young woman at the front desk asked, trying to be polite but firm. "I don't need directions," Madame Grace replied. "Just call Damalola. Tell him his mother is here." The receptionist blinked. You're your what? His mother. The woman stood still, calm, but there was something in her voice that made people listen. The kind of calm that came from power, not weakness. Within minutes, the news reached the top floor. Mr. Kelvin rushed into the CEO's office without knocking. Sir, she's downstairs. Madam Grace. Your mother. She just arrived. The CEO, who had been staring at the security footage of Sandra again, slowly turned. She came on her own? Yes, sir. And she asked to see you directly. He stood. Bring her up. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and Madam Grace stepped into her son's office. Damilola rose to meet her, but he didn't rush forward. Mummy, thank God you're safe. She walked in slowly, eyes sweeping across the room. I've been through more than you can imagine these past few days, she said softly. But I'm not here to talk about that. He frowned. Then why are you here? She turned to face him directly. I came to talk about a girl. Damilola's expression froze. A girl? He asked. Yes, Madam Grace said firmly. A cleaner. Young. Kind. She gave me her umbrella in the rain. Stood with me. Protected me. Damilola nodded slowly. Sandra Okonkwo. Yes. That's her name. How did you know? He walked back to his chair, folding his arms. I saw the footage. I was already reviewing her file. Then listen to me carefully, Madam Grace said, stepping closer. That girl has something this building has lost. Compassion. She's just a cleaner, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Exactly, his mother replied. The lowest among you. Yet the only one who helped me without knowing who I was. There was a heavy silence between them. Then she added, I want her protected. I want her rewarded. And I want her watched closely. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she may be the answer to something this company forgot. Damilola stared at her. You've changed, Mom. She smiled faintly. I almost died in the street, Dammy. I saw people pass me like I was nothing. Only one person stopped. That kind of heart is rare. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the photo on his desk, the one she had pointed at years ago when she said, If you forget where you come from, you'll never know where you're going. Downstairs, Sandra was mopping the 4th floor hallway, unaware of the conversation happening about her. Unaware that her simple act of kindness had just shifted something in the highest office of the building. And someone else, someone powerful, was watching her again. But not everyone in Apex Towers would be happy about her sudden importance. While Sandra swept the empty hallway on the 4th floor, humming a soft tune to herself, trouble was already forming in places she couldn't see. In the dim corner of the break room, Tolu leaned against a vending machine, arms folded, eyes sharp. Beside her stood Loveth, another cleaner, short and loud, with a mouth faster than her hands. The two of them had worked at Apex Towers for over 2 years, and they liked things the way they were. Quiet. Predictable. Without surprises. But ever since Sandra arrived, things felt different. First, she came with her fresh face and polite greetings. Always early. Always working hard. Management had started noticing her. Even HR stone-hearted Mrs. Edu had stopped scolding her. Then there was the whisper. One of the guards said he saw Sandra on the executive floor earlier that morning. Another cleaner swore she was sent there by HR. And now, just hours later, somebody else dropped the real bomb. You know that old woman they said went missing? The one that security was searching for? Whispered Loveth. Dem say na Sandra way help her in the rain. Tolu's eyes narrowed. Old woman? Which one? They said she's related to the Oga at the top. Like big family. Maybe even the CEO's mother. Tolu laughed coldly. So because she gave umbrella she wants to become what? Personal assistant? Abi director. Loveth giggled. You know these soft girls. One small thing and dem go begin act like dem be angel. Talu's smile vanished. Let me tell you something. This girl will not come from nowhere and start shining where we've suffered. Loveth nodded quickly. She go soon understand how things work here. Talu took her phone out of her pocket and scrolled to a saved number. Mrs. Edu HR. She stared at the screen for a moment. I think it's time she got a little reminder of where she belongs, Talu whispered. Meanwhile, upstairs in the conference lounge, Madame Grace stood by the window, sipping tea brought to her by the CEO's assistant. She had asked one question. Where is Sandra now? And within minutes, her location was quietly tracked. 4th floor. Hallway C. Would you like her to be called up, Ma? The assistant asked. Madame Grace shook her head. No. Let her continue her day. I'm watching. As Sandra mopped the floor, she suddenly felt like someone was watching her. She turned. No one. She shook her head and continued working. But the feeling didn't leave, because someone was watching. From above, from below, and from the shadows where enemies smile with clean uniforms but dirty hearts. Sandra had just finished cleaning the 4th floor restroom when her phone buzzed. It was an internal message from reception. Report to Human Resources. Immediately, her heart skipped. HR. She quickly checked her uniform, made sure it was neat, and wiped her hands with the towel on her cart. Her mind raced as she stepped into the elevator. She hadn't done anything wrong, had she? The ride to the 6th floor felt unusually long. When the elevator doors opened, the cold atmosphere of the HR department greeted her like a slap of ice. Pale gray walls, closed doors, and silence that made her steps sound louder than usual. Sandra knocked gently. A voice responded. Come in. She stepped into the office. Behind the large glass desk sat Mrs. Edu, the head of HR. A woman with sharp eyes, tight lips, and a voice that always sounded like a warning. Nobody ever smiled in her presence. Sandra stood straight. Good morning, Ma. Mrs. Edu didn't answer immediately. She was flipping through a file, Sandra's file. Sit. Sandra obeyed quickly. Mrs. Edu raised her head. Glasses halfway down her nose. You were seen on the 21st floor yesterday. In the CEO's private office. What were you doing there? Sandra swallowed. I was assigned to clean the executive floor, Ma. I received a slip from HR. It said to clean the entire floor. Mrs. Edu stared at her like she was lying. You were in the CEO's personal space. That is not ordinary. Sandra nodded quickly. Yes, Ma. I entered because the door wasn't locked. I didn't touch anything important. I just cleaned and left. And did anyone ask you to study the photos on his wall? Sandra's eyes widened. No, Ma. I just noticed someone in one of the photos. I didn't mean anything by it. Mrs. Edu leaned back in her chair. You're new here. I'll advise you to stay where you belong. Don't start getting comfortable because some people are whispering your name. Sandra's heart thumped louder. Whispers. What were people saying? I'm just doing my job, Ma, she said carefully. Then keep doing just that. There are people here who have worked for years and never stepped into that office. Watch yourself, Sandra. The warning was clear. Sandra stood, thanked her, and walked out of the office. But her steps felt heavy. The corridor seemed longer than before. The whispers, where were they coming from? Who had reported her? As she stepped back into the elevator, she caught sight of Loveth standing by the vending machine near the hallway. Loveth smiled. But not the kind of smile that warms the heart. It was the kind that pinches it. Sandra looked away. Downstairs, Madame Grace sat quietly in the waiting lounge of the top floor. She had heard about the HR summons. She sighed. This place has too many snakes in clean clothes, she muttered under her breath. Then she picked up her phone and sent a message. To Damilola. She needs a mentor. Someone who will protect her in that jungle. I'm choosing you. Meanwhile, Sandra returned to her cleaning station. Head low, heart troubled. She didn't know her name was now sitting on more than one powerful desk. But in a city tower filled with secrets, kindness was dangerous. And Sandra had already been marked, for good and for bad. At exactly 7:30 a.m. Damilola Ajayi, the CEO of Apex Towers, did something he hadn't done in years. He left his office, not to attend a board meeting, not to speak at a conference, but to do something most people in the company had never seen him do: walk through the staff floors without security or a scheduled appointment. His steps were quiet but purposeful. He wore a simple dark suit, no tie, no entourage. His assistant, Mr. Kelvin, followed behind, confused but silent. "Sir, may I ask where we're?" Damilola raised one hand. "No questions. Just observe." The elevator stopped on the 4th floor. Janitors, clerks, and customer care officers all turned as the CEO stepped out. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. Phones froze in mid-air. Even the air felt different. The floor supervisor rushed forward, stammering, "Gee, good morning, sir. Welcome, sir. Please, how can we help you?" Damilola's eyes scanned the hallway. "I'm looking for Sandra." The whisper ran through the floor like fire through dry grass. People stared in shock. The CEO came to look for a cleaner? In a small storage closet where mops and buckets were kept, Sandra was tying her apron when Loveth burst in. "CEO is here," she whispered sharply. "He's asking for you." Sandra laughed nervously. "Stop that kind of joke, please. I'm not in the mood." "I'm not joking. The man himself is walking this floor." Before Sandra could ask more, Mr. Kelvin peeked into the room. "Sandra Okonkwo?" Sandra turned slowly. "Yes, sir. The CEO would like to see you. Now." Her legs felt weak. Her hands turned cold. She quickly removed her gloves, wiped her palms on her uniform, and followed Mr. Kelvin. As she stepped into the hallway, all eyes were on her. Mr. Damilola stood tall in the middle of the corridor, arms behind his back. When he saw her, his expression softened just slightly. "Sandra," he said. "Good morning." She bowed quickly. "Good morning, sir. I heard you had a conversation with HR yesterday." Sandra nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "Good. I want you to forget about it." She looked up confused. "Sir, from today you'll no longer report to your floor supervisor. You'll work directly under my office. You'll assist my mother, Madam Grace." Gasps filled the hallway. Sandra's knees nearly gave way. "Sir, I don't understand. She requested you personally, and I trust her judgment." Sandra opened her mouth, but no words came out. "You've been kind in a world where people are busy being important. That means something to me." Then he turned and walked away, his voice trailing. "Report to the top floor after lunch. Kelvin will give you the access badge." Everyone watched in stunned silence as Sandra stood frozen. She had just been lifted from the basement of the building to its very top. But unknown to her, this sudden promotion had woken new enemies. And one of them was already watching her from behind the copy machine. Tolu. Her eyes were like blades. "She thinks this is a fairy tale," Tolu whispered under her breath. "Let's see how long it lasts." But the storm had already started. And Sandra? She was standing right in the center of it. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 21st floor. Sandra stepped out slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she held her new access badge. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She had never seen this part of the building during working hours. It was too polished, too quiet, almost like another world. Thick carpets muted her footsteps. The air smelled of lavender and leather. Elegant paintings lined the walls. She clutched her file close, unsure of where to go next. Then she saw her. Madam Grace. Standing by the large glass window, dressed in a simple cream blouse and a deep blue wrapper. Her silk scarf was neatly tied around her head, just like the day Sandra saw her in the rain. But today she looked stronger, brighter, more like the woman she truly was. Madame Grace turned. "Sandra," she said softly, like she had been expecting her all along. Sandra bowed slightly. "Good afternoon, Ma." "Come." Madame Grace waved her in gently. "Sit with me." They sat in a small private lounge just beside the CEO's main office. A tray of hot tea and biscuits sat untouched on the table. "I asked for you," the old woman said, her voice calm and warm. "Do you know why?" Sandra shook her head shyly. "No, Ma. Because I remember your face. I remember your kindness. You stood with me in the rain when no one else would. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't expect anything in return." Sandra looked down. "It was nothing, Ma. You were in need. I couldn't leave you there." Madame Grace smiled. "You say it was nothing. But kindness is never nothing." There was a pause. Sandra looked around nervously. "Ma, please, this place is too much. I don't belong here." "Who told you that?" Madame Grace asked, her tone firm. Sandra didn't know how to answer. The old woman leaned closer. "I've seen people who wear suits but carry hearts full of cruelty. And I've seen people in worn-out uniforms with hearts made of gold. What you wear doesn't tell me who you are. What you do does." Tears welled in Sandra's eyes, but she blinked them back. Madame Grace sipped her tea. "You'll assist me directly now. You'll help me organize some of the company's community projects. I want a young person who sees people, not just titles." Sandra couldn't believe her ears. "You mean I'll work with you personally?" she whispered. "Yes. You'll shadow me and later maybe even lead. But don't worry, one step at a time." Just then there was a knock. Mr. Kelvin stepped in. "Madam, the board meeting will start in 10 minutes. Madame Grace nodded. "Tell my son I'll be there shortly." As he left, she turned back to Sandra. "You will learn many things here, my dear. You'll see beauty. You'll also see the ugly parts of power. But never lose who you are. Never lose that heart that made you stop for an old woman in the rain." Sandra nodded slowly, but her stomach was tight with nerves. Outside in the hallway, Toulouse stood beside a cleaner's trolley, pretending to arrange supplies. She had followed Sandra's movements. She had watched her enter the CEO's lounge. Now she made a call. "She's in," Toulouse said into her phone. "Top floor. With the old woman. It's time to act." The voice on the other end simply replied, "Let's see how kind she is after a scandal." For the first time since she began working at Apex Towers, Sandra smiled while cleaning. She now worked in a private office just beside Madame Grace's suite, where she helped sort out letters, answer calls, and review community outreach proposals. Still felt like a dream. By 3 p.m., she was in the pantry fixing tea when she noticed something strange. The door to Madame Grace's personal study was slightly open. She never left it like that. Sandra approached it gently, calling out, "Ma? Are you in here?" No answer. She peeped in just to be sure everything was fine. And that's when she saw it. Papers scattered across the desk. A drawer left wide open. And a small silver flash drive sticking halfway out of Madame Grace's laptop. Sandra blinked in confusion. She stepped in, intending to arrange the papers. Just then a loud voice echoed behind her. "Sandra!" She turned sharply. It was Mr. Kelvin, the CEO's assistant. Behind him stood two men from the internal compliance department. Sandra's eyes widened. I was just... You were inside Madame Grace's private study, with her laptop open. Do you know that's a security breach?" Mr. Kelvin's voice was louder now, sharp like broken glass. Sandra dropped the papers immediately. "I didn't touch anything. The door was open. I thought something was wrong. I just wanted to help." "Help?" One of the compliance men laughed. "Is that what you call this?" The old woman's flash drive was halfway removed. "You could have been stealing files." "I wasn't. I don't even know what's in the drive. Please believe me." But they didn't. Within minutes, a report was written. The flash drive was taken. Sandra's ID card was collected, and she was escorted out of the top-floor office in full view of stunned staff. Madame Grace wasn't in the office at the time. She had gone out for a quick lunch meeting. Downstairs, as Sandra sat in a small glass room with HR, her mind raced. Who would do this to her? Why now? Why this? Across the building, Toulouse stood beside Loveth at the security room entrance. She slipped a folded note into the guard's hand. "Thanks for opening the study when I asked earlier," she whispered. "You'll get your transfer request by next week." Loveth chuckled. She walked right in. We just needed to wait for someone to catch her. Meanwhile, in the HR office, Sandra was trying to speak through tears. "I've never done anything wrong. Please, I didn't even know the laptop was open. I swear." But Mrs. Edu, sitting across from her, folded her arms. "This is beyond me now. We'll wait for Madame Grace's return. Until then, you're suspended." Sandra covered her face with her palms. It was all crashing down. Her progress, her peace, her little hope. And she had no idea how deep this setup went, or who was really behind it. But one thing was clear. She was no longer just a cleaner. She was a target. "Would you like me to continue?"